Next discussion, we'll be welcoming to the stage MV Coyote Smith for a discussion on opportunities in military space. So, Dr. Coyote Smith has multiple years of experience in the U.S. military and the Air Force, and has served as the head of the DreamWorks at the Pentagon, I believe, correct? So I will turn it over, and we get stuff set in just a second.
I have to be really careful with these microphones. I was at the Navy postgraduate school a couple of years ago, and I was asked to give a presentation, and they were wiring me up, and I didn't know that the mic was hot, and I said some rather unsavory terms. And every time I said something, I could feel the wall vibrate behind me. And I had brought a dozen handouts to give to people, and I didn't know that what was making the walls rumble was the laughter, because they opened up the auditorium and there's 400 people standing there listening to me cuss. So I have to be careful around microphones. It looks like I'm going to be a solo shot up here, but I'm not going to. Dallas Beanhoff, would you come up here, please? You've got a job during the presentation. What I'd like you to do, I'd like you to sit on the couch, okay? Just sit on the couch. I can do that. That's right. And we're going to do this kind of a talk show style. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dallas Beanhoff. Let's put our hands together for Dallas. Thank you. I'm here to talk a little bit about the military and how the military can expand its horizons into the commercial space sector. Now, let me change that a little bit, because we're here to change the conversation on space. I want to actually have the commercial space sector take over more of what now we're doing with the military. Here's why. I had to give a presentation to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and to what they call a graybeard commission of senior officers, retired officers who helped guide the military. And I gave them some very upsetting news. I said, okay, you take a look at the defense space budget. It's roughly $16 billion a year. And you take a look at Air Force Space Command, where you have 41,000 people dedicated to either space operations or the support for space operations, and they're operating 54 satellites. $16 billion for 41,000 people to manage 54 satellites. Dallas, does that sound like a good number to you?
Sounds high.
Sounds high.
A little, you know.
A little high. Now let me give you a point of comparison. Intelsat Corporation. Do we have a representative here from Intelsat? Somebody here? Well, I checked on the internet this morning, so you never know if it's true. Probably things have changed since this morning. Intelsat Corporation has a grand total of 1,100 employees, of which 18 people are dedicated to operating their 65 satellites on orbit. Dallas, how does that compare to the way the Air Force is doing business?
Might be a little cheaper.
Might be a little cheaper. Now,
unless they're getting high salaries.
It could be. I don't know. But here's where the opportunity for the commercial side to step in and take this over. I'll show you why the military has a problem. Now, I've been in Air Force space positions now for about 27 years. I'm worldwide qualified. I am recruited, educated through a system. I'm trained as a military officer. I have to continually go away to keep my training high. I get deployed around the world. I've been deployed for 7 years out of my Air Force career to savory places and not back doing what my perfunctory task is of operating space systems. You know, but think about this. Every young enlisted person that we recruit and we train, every officer that we recruit and we train, they have a military career that takes precedence over whatever their military operating function is. In this case, is space operations. You only sit in a job for about 2 years before they move you on, because if they let you sit in one place, it's damaging to your career. How much expertise do you think you ever get if you do a job for just about 2 years, Dallas?
About 2 years worth, right?
About
maybe,
2 years
maybe,
worth.
maybe a year's worth, because you got to learn and then unlearn.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Now, one of the problems that I find when we get some of these 2-year experienced people, okay, you've done that job for 2 years, we're going to move you up to the next echelon. We're going to send you out to one of our 14th Air Force headquarters, which we try to make the single point of space for your callback place. You're talking to somebody who has about 2 years worth of experience at the very technical, very sophisticated satellite operating type of systems that we're doing. Does that sound right?
No.
No, that doesn't sound right. You want somebody that's really steeped with experience. So we hire an awful lot of contractors. We hire a lot of contractors to augment our military talent pool. So when I say 41,000 people working on our space systems, I'm not even including all of the contractors that we have to hire to pad around our space operations squadrons, because there really is only about 2 years worth of expertise. When I arrived at a couple of space squadrons, my first year, I learned my job on OGT, on-the-job training, and the second year, my job was to train my replacement. How's that sound?
Hard.
Yes, very hard. You're doing brilliantly here. I can't thank you enough for being part of this team up here.
I'm glad to be your scapegoat.
Yeah. Now, one of the best bosses I ever had in the Air Force was the commander of the National Security Space Office, a guy named General Jim Armour. I have to say that because he's sitting right over here.
I was going to say, he's here listening, so
Yeah,
careful.
I got to be very careful. He actually started a set of thinking in motion in the small community inside the Pentagon which does space. And unfortunately, the organizations have all been shuffled around. Those people have been moved after they had about how many years of experience?
Like 2?
About 2 years of experience in any given place. There was a paper that he wrote which was really quite breathtaking. I thought it was going to be basically a Billy Mitchell type of opportunity for him. He wrote a paper that said that there should be a separate space force inside the Air Force. And here's why. We're running our space program like it's a flying business. You don't operate a taxi company like it's an ocean liner company. Why would you operate your space systems like it's an aircraft company? Because that's why you can only spend about 2 years at any given assignment before you have to start moving, because your career as a space professional needs to mirror and look very similar to the career of an aviation professional, because guess what? When it comes time for promotions, you're going to be competing with each other. Now, think about that. You're in an organization called the Air Force, and you have a flying airman's record, and you have a space professional's record sitting right next to you. Well, I don't even need to say the next sentence. You can come to your own conclusion on that one. But it continues to water down our core competency as space professionals inside your United States Air Force. Now, let's change the conversation. That's what NewSpace is all about. We want to change the conversation. What I would propose is that ultimately we stop doing satellite command and control operations and some Air Force space surveillance network and the Air Force satellite control network type functions. Stop doing them like we're running an airplane business, and stop having to hire technical experts at incredibly large salaries simply to stay there so that the Air Force guys can, well, pretty much look like you're doing the operations of the satellites, while you've got the team of technical experts in the back that are doing all the hard solving. Let's actually outsource. Let's initially establish, public-private partnerships in places of those squadrons. And let's actually hire people that will spend their entire career inside the space industry. Let's make more jobs inside space for people to become career-long space professionals steeped in the expertise of that particular type of operation. Who here would like to do that? Who here would like to have a career in space? Who? Somebody? Yes.
We have a company that could do that, or a group or something that could do that, I'm sure.
I think a group could actually advocate for this and raise this idea forward, that it's time for us to do space the way space is supposed to be done, and not in a manner that is inconsistent with just the operations and maintaining the expertise of the personnel in space, as if it were an aircraft company. Now, we like aircraft companies. We are the Air Force, after all. I'll tell you that the Air Force, and I'm not giving the Air Force, I don't want to give the idea that I'm giving the Air Force too much criticism on this. It is a brilliant Air Force. I love my Air Force. I'm so proud of our history as airmen. I really think it's brilliant. But I think it is time for us to do something fundamentally very different with the way we do our space systems. Now, Dallas, what's your job?
Yes.
What's your job day to day?
Create the future.
Create the future. Yes, I think that's about right. Now,
It is.
You do a little bit of space stuff here for Boeing, is that right?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Lunar habitats.
That's right. But
Stuff.
But you and I have never met before. This is the first time we've seen each other. We've never.
No.
No. Okay. Very good. Very good. So the question I have for you is, from a commercial side, how would you possibly envision creating or transforming our military Air Force squadrons, if you will, into commercially run companies?
I don't know yet. I don't know how you operate. I've never been on your side of the fence.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we could figure it out.
Strong positive attitude. Thank you very much. Now, the reason why I put him on the spot there is that really is the big question. How would civilians know how to do this? And this is why I recommend creating our squadron, or transitioning our squadrons immediately into public-private partnerships. Move in a CEO, if you will, of that squadron, a civilian, and key people that are civilians, instead of military personnel being assigned to your organization, you hire qualified civilians to come through your training program. And then those people actually stay with that organization, and they provide the service, fee for service, to the government and to the other users. I don't see much of a need. There are some Gucci capabilities that we have tucked away on some satellites that we will always need to have a couple of military people around on those space systems. But what I would propose is that those don't need to be active duty military people. Those could be Air National Guardsmen who are just regular civilians 9 times out of 10, but on that 10th time, they've got the legal authority and the opportunity to do whatever type of special function the military may need to do with those organizations. Now, the other thing about this, because this is now a company, that company needs to buy replacement satellites. It's a company. It's not the blue suit, space is not a program type of people that we have that go out and do acquisition with massive competitions between corporations. They're able to go out and simply buy the type of capability that you need. Now, back in 1994, for General Roger de Cook, when he was a brigadier and he was running Air Force Space Command's requirements in Colorado Springs, he led a panel. Bob Butterworth, you probably have read some of Bob Butterworth's stuff. He appears frequently with Jeff Faust on Space Review. A bunch of his articles have been published there. He works largely with Air Force Space Command over many years. Bob Butterworth says the outcome of that study was 3 points in order to reduce the overall cost of Air Force space. Number one was to leverage off of commercial capabilities whenever possible. Okay, yes, we've done that. Number two, use commercial off-the-shelf purchasing capabilities. You know, when you want to buy an imagery satellite, just go out and buy a commercial off-the-shelf imagery satellite. Just go to a company and buy it. And the last point was that they wanted to leverage international partnerships. Okay, well, we've had another study, Dallas.
Yes, we did.
We've had another study. And we did this study just a couple weeks ago. And what do you think the question was, how are we going to lower the cost of Air Force space?
Buy stuff that's available.
Yeah, number one. We had the same 3 findings. In more than 15 years, we could not figure out how to leverage better off of the commercial market. We already are. And commercial off-the-shelf purchases is a little bit tricky because there's not an awful lot of folks out there that are building some of the high-tech stuff, the high-speed comm stuff that we use, or how many commercial missile warning satellites are available out there? Not many. Oh my gosh. The SBIRS program, that turned into just such a bureaucratic nightmare. How many Nunn-McCurdy breaches, General, did SBIRS take us to? 4. Is it 3 or 4?
But that must be your...
4. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I didn't see the finger.
It feels a lot like 4, I tell you. And those were not pretty. And largely the reason why is the government is a lousy customer. When we are purchasing our own stuff, we are a very hard, demanding customer. Would you say that's right?
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And you're unreliable.
And we're unreliable.
You might not be a customer next year for the same thing you're buying this year.
Right. Those points are very valid. We have a problem because our requirements change continuously. And the other thing is, when you lay out the requirements for a satellite, it might take you a year to figure out what you want. And then it takes you another year to start the drawing and the designing of it. So you get that drawing and design, and now you're already starting to fall into obsolescence with the technology. By the time you've built that, the program's ready to get launched, you're out of date and you're flying old stuff. That's a problem for us. And so we constantly beat up poor Dallas, who I've never met before until today, with new requirements all the time that keep changing.
We love those change orders.
Yes, I'm sure that you do. But the point, though, is we need to become a better customer. Now, maybe the government is not the people that should be buying their own stuff. Maybe if we establish our space squadrons as public-private partnerships on the way to being entirely independent corporations that provide a service for fee to the U.S. government, they can simply go out and buy using commercial practices on how to purchase without having to go through the government processes. This is how we start to change the conversation. We start to change who the responsible actors are for these space systems. Quite honestly, I don't need to spend my time recruiting, using the Air Force recruiting system to recruit people into the Air Force and train them to be airmen and have them operate space systems that are highly complex. It's designed by MIT and operated by inner-city high school graduates. What ends up happening, we hire the MIT guys to hide around the back and fill the back office, and when something breaks, they come out and they fix it. But it costs us a lot of money to do business that way. We almost double our squadron size. The other thing is when the Air Force, 41,000 people managing 54 satellites, and I believe during that study, the paper that you wrote, General, you determined there was about 13,000 Air Force space satellite operators that were in that mix. I think that 13,000 was about right. So what's the rest of those people that makes up that 41,000? Well, when you have an Air Force squadron, you have to have so many security police personnel, you have to have so many cooks, you have to have so many people that doing personnel processes, you have to have commanders, flight commanders, etc. It just becomes very large. Now, it works highly efficiently for a flying organization, but it does not match what we're doing in space. Now, there is something that's changing right now. The Air Force is going through a massive cultural change as unpiloted vehicles, well, that's the wrong term, they are piloted, they're just remotely piloted. Remotely piloted vehicles is changing the way the Air Force conceives its own operations. And now flying operations are becoming, well, in some cases, much more similar to what we've been doing, or the way you would have liked to have been doing space. So I think the change is afoot, but I think we have the opportunity to do more commercial stuff. Now, Dallas, do you have any questions?
Did you forget about the aerospace folks behind you as well? Aerospace Corporation?
Yes, I like those guys.
Yeah. So they're your corporate legacy.
Yeah, they are.
Right. And so they help you a lot too. Is that in addition to the 41,000?
No, that doesn't include, that's beyond the 41,000 people. So we have actually, and I would say because we don't invest in actually making experts out of our space professionals, we suffer with having to keep them around a lot longer. We tend to solve problems as a cluster because somebody's got one piece of the puzzle, one part of the solution to any problem that comes along. Now,
So when is the RFP coming out for the service company, the private partnership, public-private partnership to manage all these satellites?
Wouldn't it be great? I don't
Yeah.
know when it's coming out. The Air Force hasn't decided that it wants to do this yet. And it's not an issue right now that's on the table. This is just an idea that a couple of us have had, over beer at the officers' club on Friday afternoons. But it's something that we think that could be entirely viable. But we need to have people that would embrace this idea. We need to have somebody that would talk about it in public. We need to have folks like yourselves and our partners at the Space Studies Institute and the National Space Society, the Interplanetary Society. We need to have this body of people embrace this type of idea for commercializing what now is done by the Air Force that need not be done by the Air Force. It will lower costs over time. It'll provide more civilian jobs in the space community. It'll provide a much better appearance to our potential international partners. One of the problems that we've always had whenever we've ticked off that mark that we want more international partnerships, we suddenly run into things like ITAR, which I hate with a passion.
How much do you hate it?
With a passion.
Thank you.
It's ridiculous the type of roadblocks that we find ourselves in, and it's because we are a government, and we have government restraints between us and our international partners. Now think about this on the side. Commercial companies, they do international as a matter of business. And there aren't lawyers, massive numbers of lawyers and diplomats involved. When the government does international partnerships, you know there's going to be diplomats followed by lawyers, followed by the folks that are actually going to do the job. However, Boeing, about 40% of a Boeing aircraft is made by their competition, Airbus. Conversely, Airbus, about 40% of their aircraft are made by Boeing. They really just compete back and forth for who's going to be the prime and have the lead on those projects when it comes to most of the major type of aircraft that are out there today. And you know what? They just fell into their natural niche. Boeing makes fabulous wings, great undercarriages, interiors and other control type services. That's just absolutely fabulous for Airbus. And so they have become a collaborative type of industry in building and designing aircraft. But it didn't require teams of diplomats, followed by an inordinate amount of lawyers, followed by the people who actually do the work. International partnership is the way business is just done. If me and the Air Force, if I need to acquire parts from overseas to fix my stuff, okay, it's going to go through diplomats, lawyers, and everybody else, and then I'm going to go over and get the part. Then the lawyers and then the diplomats have to go back in and fill the hole that I've created. But business just goes, hey, let's go online. We'll just order it up. The part comes. They don't care where it comes from. That's business. And you find the cheapest price, a competitive price, and a better value for your customers that you pass along as a savings, and you continue to get the job done. Yeah. Now, Dallas is ready to take questions, if any of you folks would like to throw some things up here.
Yes, Al?
I just want to make a comment that I'm quite sure there are a few lawyers involved in the Boeing-Airbus collaboration.
Oh, I'm sure there are quite a few there as well, but I can promise you there's fewer than if it was government-led. Yes?
You know, Coyote, we talk about this stuff all the time. I mean, if you want to take baby steps, how many studies have we done contracting out the range?
Yeah.
Right? How many times have we tried to contract out the range? And Space Command, you know, their head explodes.
I am
We
wondering.
can contract out the range. We're talking about contracting out the range as a baby step. So consistent personnel, their metrics are to keep the equipment up and running. They're already bringing the launch heads back. You know, there's all kinds of ways. Can't get it done. Can't get it done. It's control. You know that.
It is a matter of control.
You know, I mean, just starting with the thing they love, you know, the rockets. We could contract out the range. Can't do it. We've tried forever. You know, ComSats are one thing, but, you know, frankly, the whole maybe Air Force satellite system you could contract out, nav, weather, comm.
Yes.
Just not our friends at the NRO. But you just can't do it.
You know,
It's cultural.
There is a cultural roadblock.
It's the missile crew.
There's fortunately the missile community has been separated now from the space community. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to more centralized space business without all these distractions. One of the greatest problems, though, is now they've put the cyber numbered Air Force into Air Force Space Command. So Air Force Space Command is expected to do space and cyber. And guess who's eating space now? It's the cyber mission. You know how big and prevalent and diversified the entire cyber community is and the need for cyber security. The commander of Air Force Space Command is thoroughly distracted with that as a mission. Sir?
My name's Mike Koffel. I was in the Air Force for 26 years. I served with General Dukuk on the reinvention of space effort. It was called reinvention of space. How do you reinvent a vacuum? More importantly, I was also the program officer for stand-up at the Space Warfare Center. My question to you is, after all that we did, and I was a fighter pilot coming to space, I was a green bag kind of guy, is the intransigence of the Space Command was the problem. They did not want to change. Breaking that culture, and we still haven't managed to do that. Such things that we have 10-cap back then, tactical exploitation of national capabilities. We had Talent Shield, which became SIBR. We had a lot of other things going on, but it was the intransigence of the space guys. We've done it this way for 40 years. We're not going to change. And by the way, the only guys that had anything to shoot were the missileers. So it was really tough to see the space guys put on the leather jackets and the outfits and act like a bunch of quote-unquote warriors.
Yeah, your comment is very valuable, and I thank you for your service, by the way. Yeah, you know, cultures, when you get something like a major command, it's going to have a culture that is going to pervade through that organization. It's unfortunate because it's like a huge dreadnought, and the only oar you have is about the size of your hand to stick into the water to steer that entire enormous ship. So when you change the conversation, you need to take the conversation outside the organization so that it suddenly hears other ideas. The problem is they can become entrenched even deeper in their own resistance. However, we've got a friend, and it's an unlikely friend. That friend is called budget cuts. How many F-22s, how many F-35s do you want? Well, you better do something with the money you're spending on space, because $16 billion for 41,000 to manage 54 satellites is a bit much.
Thanks, Coyote.
You're welcome, Dallas. Yes?
When you talk about the international partnerships, how can you fill us in on how the relations are going with WGS and the international partners on that program?
I'm not familiar, I'm not on the inside of how WGS is developing. I can tell you just a couple of broad sweeping comments about international partnerships. They have a mixed track record. Sometimes international partnerships cost you more money and cause significant bureaucratic delays in accomplishing anything. The International Space Station is a good example. International Space Station, everybody who participated in that ended up spending more money than they wanted to spend. Everybody had their feelings hurt in the end, and so it wasn't really like this rosy, happy, good news story for international partnership. Galileo has been finding that out as well, and I like Galileo. I think it's a brilliant constellation design. I love the signal design that they have, that they've built for that bird. But Galileo itself has had a rocky international partnership, and the standing up of the Europeans, well, the stand up of the European Union in the midst of it did not help things, because everybody is trying to find their place in the sun and what their voice on these issues are going to be within that community.
WGS 6 is like mid-13 now, and I think that's the international bird.
Microphone?
Can I just use my command voice? That's almost good. WGS 6 is mid-13 now, and so I think that's our international satellite that we partnered. I have to go back and look at exactly which one that is, but I think that's what it is. And so that's worked well. Galileo exists because we were being a little difficult when we were working with our international partners on the GPS signal. You remember that, when
Yeah,
we
I
were
do
back in
indeed.
uniform.
Yeah.
So we kind of created Galileo, we the Air Force, on our GPS controls. So it is difficult, though, you're right. And, you know, and I talked to General Welsh back in the day when we were doing EELV. When he created Space Command, it was just supposed to be satellite control, right? But then with McPeak and the rest of that, and busting up SAC and TAC, you know, we gave Space Command missiles, and then we gave them launch vehicles. And that's kind of how that whole thing sort of started to spiral with the missile culture. I mean, you know, back in the day, Space Division worked for Systems Command, and it was an acquisition organization. So it's pretty hard to put the genie back in the bottle now with all of that.
It is.
It's very entrenched now. Your point is excellent. It's just hard.
It is hard.
That shouldn't keep us from trying.
Oh, amen. Amen. Please start with the range.
Yeah, why the range? Why we even have it? Rand Simberg.
Yes, Colonel. When you were talking about this with your partners in officers in crime, whatever, did you take into account the possibility of a space guard, as has been suggested by, Colonel McKinney and later, more recently, Jim Bennett, and how that might help transition this? Because that would be one way of breaking the culture if we establish that organization, and they'd be much more amenable to doing this kind of contracting.
Yes, in fact, the idea of a space guard closely mirroring what we do with our Coast Guard is an idea that keeps popping up, and it's one that I like very much. As we look into outer space, we have a problem. We have NASA, which has, it's completely civilian and for peaceful purposes, and then we have the Air Force Space Program, which serves a martial master, a warfighter. Well, you know, it would be excellent if we had a guard-type construct, a space guard instead of a numbered Air Force for space, simply for this reason. Somebody needs to do constabulary enforcement of laws in outer space. And with guard, like Coast Guard, they can simultaneously be law enforcement, or they can be employed as a martial force in times of war and whenever that's necessary. So Rand, I think that's a brilliant idea. What would be the affiliation of a space guard? Well, probably on a daily basis, not unlike the Coast Guard's alignment. You know, different times it's been with Treasury, it's been with Commerce, it's been moved to Department of Homeland Security. A relationship for a space guard would be much less offensive to our international partners than Air Force Space Command, because when you see Air Force Space Command, what you get hit with right up front is, well, this is a warfighting organization. You know, I don't know too many people that operate communication satellites that are ready to kill people. You know, it's just, but they're trained by the Air Force, and that is what we do. So Rand, thank you very much. And I do think that that is another alternative that we'd ought to consider. I think probably if I went to the public-private partnership route, if we made that choice as a nation, that the military serving members there would be guardsmen, and they would be under probably state governors, unless nationalized, or perhaps under Commerce or Treasury for a daily basis. Yes?
So I've been in the business of forming R&D partnerships for 20 years in public-private partnerships. I'm not in the commercial space business. And in that time, I did some work a long time ago for Office of Force Transformation, OFT, for Zabrowski, to promote it, and did some work for JEFCOM. And for JEFCOM, we actually negotiated a public-private partnership to implement something called APEX, Adaptive Planning Execution. Couldn't get any of them implemented. So we had sat at the table, negotiated the deal, structured it, documented it, funded it, brought it to implementation, couldn't get it implemented. So in the world of PPPs, there are as many designs for them as there are rockets. And I don't know anything about rockets. But there's many. So for you to advance your concept, in addition to asking the folks here to talk about it, what models have you seen? What examples have you seen that you'd like to promote? An example is cybersecurity in the US has a national policy to implement through PPPs. There are 9 of them. Is that the kind of example you're thinking of?
Dallas, would you like to answer that?
I'll pass.
Okay. We're at the conversation stage now. This is not, we're not ready to actually make proposals. Quite literally, this is the type of discussion that I'm having with you now, is the first public discussion of it beyond just our brainstorming session, a bunch of officers standing around the club drinking beer. But we think that this is probably a better way forward than $16 billion for 41,000 people to manage 54 satellites. Yeah, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Hopkins from the National Space Society.
I have a question for Dallas.
Thanks.
And I haven't asked a question yet. Dallas, in the past, you've remarked that you know everything. Is that really true?
No.
I was hoping you were going to say yes, because I had a witty remark, but I'll leave it at that.
But I'll still give you an answer to your question.
Oh, okay.
If you have a question, it may not be the right answer.
No, that was my question.
Oh, okay. Well, then it wasn't the right answer.
Okay, that was good. Anything else from the floor? 10 minutes left.
There's one on the right. Okay.
Leon Panetta seems like a pretty sensible guy. I'm wondering, is this on his radar screen? And if it's not, how can you get it there without breaking the chain of command?
This is where the discussion begins. It's not on his screen. This idea is not there, but the seed that I have planted is giving them the statistics. 16 billion for 41,000 to manage 54 satellites is a bit much. And then you give them the Intel example, Intelsat example, and they suddenly can put that into a comparison and realize there's something dreadfully wrong.
Coyote, would a Space Guard concept help with the problem that we have with space situational awareness, the fact that there is a seemingly disconnect between the private sector's need for information on conjunctions and the military's reticence to provide that information freely and openly? Would the imposition of a Space Guard possibly help with that?
I imagine it could, because you would create an organization that would start with a different charter. And I think that's the best systemic answer I could probably give you. It is a problem. There are numbers of discussions. They'll save this for a little bit, a talk that I have to give a little bit later. In the international community, they're working on codes of conduct for responsible spacefaring behavior. And one of the big things is about information sharing, data sharing back and forth between users. The problem that I'll give you right off the front is those discussions are being held by the arms control community and not inside a commerce-minded community inside the United Nations. When it comes to arms control, they like the status quo of nothing happening. And unfortunately, the bureaucracy that flows from those types of discussions creates like the you can't own property in space, you have to share the profits with everybody else on the planet. Those types of discussions happen there. And I don't think we would have developed the Americas if we had the Code of Conduct for Responsible America Development set by the arms control community, but we shall see. Thanks, Jim. Good seeing you, by the way.
Coyote, to address Jim's question, the reason that Jim Bennett wrote that paper on Space Guard, which later became an essay in the New Atlantis, was he was specifically requested by Scott Pace to do it to address exactly that issue.
Thanks, Rand. Yeah. Rand, would you like a place on the couch up here, bud? Yeah.
I think there's one in the back.
Rick Tomlinson.
On the left.
The godfather of the Space Frontier Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm just curious. Some version of the Space Guard you are talking about as an international entity, correct?
Well, I was thinking initially as the United States Space Guard.
Okay. Right, so in this formulation then, what you're doing is you're triggering a reaction from our friends in China and Russia to create their own Space Guard?
Well, it could work that way, yes.
So now we've triggered an arms race in space?
No.
No? Okay, I'm just curious. Or do you bring them in?
You know,
and by bringing them in, now what you have to do is establish an international regime of behavior, because you have to have metrics by which to decide when you engage Space Guard against, for, or in support of, or whatever, the acts of any particular national player. So there's a lot of different international policy decisions that come shooting out of this. It's not just a let's form a Space Guard, sort of like the U.S. Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has to operate within the parameters of existing national and international policies, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think actually the Chinese and the Russians would welcome a move away from the much more martially focused Air Force Space Command to a U.S. Space Guard if that were to be created. The Guard program, Coast Guard-like program is very different than active duty military personnel. They present themselves on most ships that travel the high seas, and that's another one of the global commons. So a Coast Guard-like thing for space is something that would fit more naturally into a international waters, international type of mindset. And when we think about space, we have to keep in mind that any one of our satellites in a lower Earth orbit than geostationary is going to transit over, circumnavigate the globe in the course of just a few hours or a few minutes. So there's a very international flavor to what we do in space just by its nature. But of course, when you do these types of things, you always have open discussions with the Russians and the Chinese and the European Union about what you're doing and why. And they don't have any resistance about telling America what they think we'd ought to be doing. Which is handy. I mean, that's good, right? Yes, ma'am.
She has a question? Good. I have one next.
When you talk about the Space Guard, right, talks about, it immediately brings in my mind the idea of frontiers, right? I mean, on water and on ground, it's easier to define, what are the territories that those guards are looking over. So how do you think about doing that in space?
Well, basically, the same way where we define space is where those Space Guard type organizations or people would be involved. They'd be ground-based heavily, they wouldn't be in outer space in this century. Probably in the next century they'll be outer space, we hope, and securing space commerce out there. That's one of the roles about a Coast Guard. One of the fundamental purposes of a Coast Guard is to secure the routes of commerce. And so a Space Guard would be responsible for securing space commerce. Gary?
So, Coyote.
Oh, Dallas
Yeah,
got a question.
Rick raised this thought in my mind when he asked his question. If we establish a Space Guard, which is a non-warfighting entity, and the Chinese have a warfighting entity driving their space program, and the Russians, at least under the Soviet Union, did too, where does that leave us relative to them militarily in space?
I'm not that worried about it because a Guard has a simultaneous mission as a constabulary force, but it can swing by presidential decree to work as a martial force as well. But it's principally a constabulary force. Yes?
I was wondering if you had thought about the third function of the Coast Guard, which is safety, rescue, certain emergency services.
Yes, those types of things fall right in there. And we also have like treaties that say that those are the types of things that nations have to provide to astronauts, et cetera. And it fits nicely into that. And thank you for bringing that up, Gary. By the way, Gary Olson, that's a brilliant point. Thank you. That fits nicely into the Guard argument.
Google Space Guard James Bennett.
And wait, I've got just a few seconds left. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Everybody who's in this room understands the importance of a Space Coast Guard or planetary defense. But I can tell you as someone who has actually walked around and talked to congressmen and space staffers, when you talk about why we need this, sometimes it doesn't always come through. And I think that, Coyote, what you're doing is awesome, but we as advocates and activists need to make sure that when we are out there, we are explaining how truly important this is, because the next Tunguska event might not happen in Siberia. It might be New York or somewhere like that where it's really bad. So have you thought about how we can get beyond the sphere just out inside of our Air Force culture, but also to maybe widen our net?
No. But thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Mr. Dallas Beanhot. Thank you, Dallas. You ever get if you do a job for just about 2 years, Dallas?
About 2 years worth, right?
About
maybe,
2 years
maybe,
worth.
maybe a year's worth, because you got to learn and then unlearn.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Now, one of the problems that I find when you get some of these 2-year experienced people, okay, you've done that job for 2 years, we're going to move you up to the next echelon. We're going to send you out to one of our 14th Air Force headquarters, which we try to make the single point of space for your callback place. You're talking to somebody who has about 2 years worth of experience at the very technical, very sophisticated satellite operating type of systems that we're doing. Does that sound right?
No.
No, that doesn't sound right. You want somebody that's really steeped with experience. So we hire an awful lot of contractors. We hire a lot of contractors to augment our military talent pool. So when I say 41,000 people working on our space systems, I'm not even including all of the contractors that we have to hire to pad around our space operations squadrons, because there really is only about 2 years worth of expertise. When I arrived at a couple of space squadrons, my first year, I learned my job on OGT, on-the-job training, and the second year, my job was to train my replacement. How's that sound?
Hard.
Yes, very hard. You're doing brilliantly here. I can't thank you enough for being part of this team up here.
I'm glad to be your scapegoat.
Yeah. Now, one of the best bosses I ever had in the Air Force was the commander of the National Security Space Office, a guy named General Jim Armour. I have to say that because he's sitting right over here.
I was going to say,
Next discussion, we'll be welcoming to the stage MV Coyote Smith for a discussion on opportunities in military space. So, Dr. Coyote Smith has multiple years of experience in the U.S. military and the Air Force, and has served as the head of the DreamWorks at the Pentagon, I believe, correct? So I will turn it over, and we get stuff set in just a second.
I have to be really careful with these microphones. I was at the Navy postgraduate school a couple years ago, and I was asked to give a presentation, and they were wiring me up, and I didn't know that the mic was hot, and I said some rather unsavory terms. And every time I said something, I could feel the wall vibrate behind me. And I had brought a dozen handouts to give to people, and I didn't know that what was making the walls rumble was the laughter, because they opened up the auditorium and there's 400 people standing there listening to me cuss. So I have to be careful around microphones. It looks like I'm going to be a solo shot up here, but I'm not going to. Dallas Beanhot, would you come up here, please? You've got a job during the presentation. What I'd like you to do, I'd like you to sit on the couch, okay? Just sit on the couch. I can do that. That's right. And we're going to do this kind of a...
They're listening, so careful.
I got to be very careful. He actually started a set of thinking in motion in the small community inside the Pentagon which does space. And unfortunately, the organizations have all been shuffled around. Those people have been moved after they had about how many years of experience?
Like 2?
About 2 years of experience in any given place. There was a paper that he wrote which was really quite breathtaking. I thought it was going to be basically a Billy Mitchell type of opportunity for him. He wrote a paper that said that there should be a separate space force inside the Air Force. And here's why. We're running our space program like it's a flying business. You don't operate a taxi company like it's an ocean liner company. Why would you operate your space systems like it's an aircraft company? Because that's why you can only spend about 2 years at any given assignment before you have to start moving, because your career as a space professional needs to mirror and look very similar to the career of an aviation professional, because guess what? When it comes time for promotions, you're going to be competing with each other. Now, Think about that. You're in an organization called the Air Force. And you have a flying airman's record, and you have a space professional's record sitting right next to you. Well, I don't even need to say the next sentence. You can come to your own conclusion on that one. But it continues talk show style. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dallas Beanhoff. Let's put our hands together for Dallas. Thank you. I'm here to talk a little bit about the military and how the military can expand its horizons into the commercial space sector. Now, let me change that a little bit, because we're here to change the conversation on space. I want to actually have the commercial space sector take over more of what now we're doing with the military. Here's why. I had to give a presentation to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and to a brown, what they call a graybeard commission of senior officers, retired officers who helped guide the military. And I gave them some very upsetting news. I said, okay, you take a look at the defense space budget. It's roughly $16 billion a year. And you take a look at Air Force Space Command, where you have 41,000 people dedicated to either space operations or the support for space operations, and they're operating 54 satellites. $16 billion for 41,000 people to manage 54 satellites. Dallas, does that sound like a good number to you?
Sounds high.
Sounds high.
A little, you know.
A little high. Now let me give you a point of comparison. Intelsat Corporation. Do we have a representative here from Intelsat? Somebody here? Well, I checked on the internet this morning, so you never know if it's true. Probably things have changed since this morning. Intelsat Corporation has a grand total of 1,100 employees, of which 18 people are dedicated to operating their 65 satellites on orbit. Dallas, how does that compare to the way the Air Force is doing business?
Might be a little cheaper.
Might be a little cheaper. Now,
unless they're getting high salaries.
It could be. I don't know. But here's where the opportunity for the commercial side to step in and take this over. I'll show you why the military has a problem. Now, I've been in the space, in Air Force space positions now for about 27 years. I'm worldwide qualified. I am recruited, educated through a system. I'm trained as a military officer. I have to continually go away to keep my training high. I get deployed around the world. I've been deployed for 7 years out of my Air Force career to savory places and not back doing what my perfunctory task is of operating space systems. You know, but think about this. Every person, every young enlisted person that we recruit and we train, every officer that we recruit and we train, they have a military career that takes precedence over whatever their military operating function is. In this case, is space operations. You only sit in a job for about 2 years before they move you on, because if they let you sit in one place, it's damaging to your career. How much expertise do you think